Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation.
Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is your host Salah Reiki, and I'm delighted to have with me today Anjali Leon. Anjali is a coach, facilitator, and agile practitioner. She helps individuals and organizations navigate complexity and change and deliver better outcomes sooner. I believe Anjali and I met back in 2018 at the Agile Lean DC conference in 2018.
That's right.
I don't know if you remember. I came to attend your session there, and we played a game. It was an agile ball game, and it was very intriguing to me the way that you simulated flow with this game. And I know ever since we've been in contact talking about proactive coaching, professional coaching, agile, Kanban, many other topics. So I'm glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and talk to you about flow.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I don't know how this conversation is going to go, but I know we will talk about flow. Before we start, give us a little bit of background. What's your story? How did you end up getting into this type of work?
Well, I think like many people that I know who are agile coaches now, I started out in technology. I was a software engineer for many years and really enjoyed that way of working and solving puzzles, if you will. But I always had an affinity for people. So I often, even on my teams, ended up being kind of the glue that, got people together, and loved celebrating people. I also loved just teaching. So I ended up becoming a mentor for any new employees and stuff like that. So just from my sense of affinity for people and being a fairly organized person, some of the project management work in our organization started falling on my shoulders. And so instead of just doing it out of instinct, I decided to go get some formal training. So I actually started project management path and started working towards my PMP certification. And then one day my manager came and dropped the little black book of Scrum, on my desk, the Mike Beadle, Ken Schwaber book. And he said, we got to do this thing. And, in reading that book, and I still recall like not very many pictures, just some text. But it seemed pretty simple. And I said, much more conducive to the kinds of work that we do in the startup environment that we were in. And so we started putting it into practice, and of course made every mistake in the book. And more, I think. But it was kind of intriguing in the way in which we were able to really tap into the individual's capabilities, their kind of aligning their interests to the work, all of this. It just produced some amazing outcomes. And I started getting more and more interested in that than my software development work. And I wanted to do more of it there. It was a small company and I couldn't just realign completely to Agile. And so I left at some point, deciding to go find where I could do more of this Agile Scrum thing. And here I am. 8 years later, I'm an independent coach, and I enjoy doing this all the time, teaching and coaching on the subject.
Your story really resonates with me because, we share similar ways of how we came to this work. I also did my PMP at some point in the beginning. And as you just pointed out, like the focus was initially for me was, just getting things done, getting tasks. And then I realized it's more about the relationship aspect of the work. And I know you have your own independent practice and you call it people coach, which is very interesting because even though you came from a technical background and you're a software developer, you're focused a lot now on people to help them improve, individuals and teams and organizations. So what made you decide that this is going to be your focus, or at least the company that you started is People Coach?
It's funny how the evolution of that name has happened. Actually, and I think the name has evolved the way in which my brain has engaged with agile ways of working. So you said, like initially we come to it in terms of like, hey, let's go get things done in a pragmatic way. So the PPL actually stood for Pragmatic Project Leadership. And over time, I realized, hey, I was becoming a little more of a risk taker. I was shifting from projects to products. And so the name didn't quite fit. And at the same time, I was really connecting more to purpose-driven work. So my approach to people is really in helping them identify what makes them come fully alive. And what I really saw in that first implementation of Scrum is even more than just the process. It was people were able to apply their gift to the work that we were doing. And they lit up when they were able to do that. And in turn, we had great business outcomes. And so for me, that has been the essence. So pragmatic project leadership shifted to purposeful professional leadership. So the PPL expanded actually stands for purposeful professional leadership. But my company name and stuff is PPL-coach. And I said, that really, really speaks to who I am. I am a people-focused coach first, people first. And I believe in as we look at things with the people first approach, we get all those other outcomes as byproducts anyway in a much better way.
Yeah.
So now I will take people coach.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I read it actually. So to just for people who don't know, like you have as PPL-coach. So when I read it, I read okay, people coach, but it's more than the name implies. You're also talking about like, purpose and leadership, which again it comes to this idea of focusing on the connection and relationships. I mean, even when I facilitate agile workshops or teach people about agile, I point out that the agile values, the first sentence, obviously we're uncovering better ways of working and by doing it and helping others do it, right? So we're basically in that work or business of helping others. And then the values are pointing to 3 values that are related to people, interactions, responding to change and all that. And then the only one that is related to the task or the focus on getting things done is working software, right? So you're pointing to that there is heavily focusing on relationships can lead us to get to better results and better outcomes rather than starting just focusing on the tasks and getting things done, which is how I started in the beginning of this journey, as many of us.
Absolutely. I mean, I in some ways I feel that that's the only way, focusing on people and relationships, especially when we're dealing with complex stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's no predetermined way that we know of that works. And so it's through tapping into each other's gifts and intelligence do we come up with, solutions to these complex problems. So yeah. I think it's necessary.
And I know we both are trained in coactive coaching, and one of the cornerstones that I like, and I'm sure you can relate to that, is the idea of people are naturally resourceful and whole, right? So they can come up with their own solutions. We as coaches are there to nudge and help ask the right questions and get them to explore or see possibilities that they may have not seen before. So there are a lot of intersections of different topics. And I know we've talked about this before in many occasions in conferences and other venues. So I want to, because our theme today, I want to focus on this idea of flow. And again, I know you're also a pro Kanban coach and trainer. So we're probably gonna explore the flow from the individual side of things, which is, in the psychology world, and then the flow from the team and maybe also the process side of things. So it seems to me like this might be a good segue to start maybe with the flow as in just the individual flow, right? The idea of this getting in the zone, being, lost in doing some fulfilling work and not really thinking about anything else and intense focus.
Yeah.
So what does flow mean to you? I guess maybe we can start there.
Yeah, it is kind of that sense of just getting lost in what you're doing. But in the process of that, getting lost in it, you're highly productive, highly creative, and you have just such a sense of satisfaction coming out of it. I think I experienced this, I don't know, you probably as well, countless times as software engineers. When I see software engineers really as artists, we are artists, and our craft or art is that code. And in solving the problems that or finding this bug, you can really get into it in a way that you completely lose track of time,
Mm-hmm.
and you're so focused on this, and your creative juices are flowing. And it's such a sense of accomplishment when you come out of it. And so that's my first experience with flow in that sense. But I didn't really pay much attention to it. It just was like a natural thing. But I started to really think about it when bringing agile ways of working to teams. And a lot of the software team members would often kind of be a little bit resistant or upset about the number of meetings that they would have on their calendars. And I think when we introduce frameworks like Scrum, for example, there are some new collaboration sessions that are introduced. But the intention is really to replace some traditional meetings with those. But in most places, they're just additive. And so now people's calendars are just kind of full of these meetings and events. And at that point, the distinction between a collaboration session and a meeting is not quite established with a lot of these software engineers. And so they would push back on these meetings. And I would think they'd ask for, hey, I just need time to get my work done. And it kind of brought me back to that sense of needing that space to be able to really focus on the work. And that feeling that you get of accomplishment when you're able to do that. And with interruptions, it's hard to get into that state. So I started to like dig into this a little bit more from two different angles. One, like, what is this state? And what is so, it's a little bit addicting. You want it. Yes, there's good outcomes from it, but what about it feels addicting? And the second thing is like, okay, now if we are in a collaborative environment where we are all working in teams, can we achieve that sense of flow when we're working with other people?
Yeah.
So that's, was my first like interest in digging into this topic a little more. And the outcome of my initial study was that session that you attended at Lean Agile DC, where I was able to kind of tap into some of that through the ballpoint game. That ballpoint game, I tell you, you can debrief it in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I found a conversation about flow in that game as well.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely addicting, or at least it brings a lot of fulfillment or emotions to just be focused and fully immersed in the work. And it's interesting you mentioned this idea of like being an artist or in this process of creating something new, or even if you're trying to merge ideas that maybe are related and you're connecting the dots. It's hard to be focused when you're constantly being distracted or interrupted. So yeah, speaking about the ideas of the meeting, I remember having a development team, and one of the developers were just, you couldn't keep up with all these meetings because, as you said, a lot of companies, they don't replace the meetings that they already have when they introduce something like Scrum or any collaborative sort of meetings, which is more like working sessions than just like the meetings that we traditionally think of as like updates and status and all that stuff. So they don't get rid of that. They just add those meetings on top of the meetings that they already have. And now the people doing the work, the teams are constantly interrupted. He showed me his calendar at some point. It's all blocked with meetings. And I asked, so when do you do any focused work? And he's like, later after everyone is gone, which again is contradictory to the idea of encouraging this sort of sustainable work in Agile. If the teams or the developers are staying for longer hours because they can't get the work done in the day because they're constantly being interrupted and distracted by all these unnecessary meetings for the most part.
Totally. So like from a people coach perspective, it's an important topic to address because it becomes unsustainable if people have to actually find time outside of whatever hours that we allocate for our work lives to be able to just get stuff done.
This idea of flow, when I came across the flow from the psychological aspect, I think it was coined or named by this psychologist. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who has a TED Talk that everyone can go and watch. But there is this flow model that he created, and this flow is actually not just the state of being in the zone, but it's mixed with a lot of the feelings around.
Yes.
So he has this like chart which has like challenges and then skills, or and then if the skills and if you're able to balance those challenges and skills, then you get into that state of flow. If your challenges is low, you
Yes.
get bored and you don't want to really, you feel like you're dragging your feet. And if
Yes.
the challenges are really high and the skills are low, then you're in the space of anxiety and just you're not able to function. There's a lot of hesitation or fear. So I find that interesting because it when we talk about flow from a positive psychology or the psychological standpoint, it very much connect with the flow in frameworks or strategies like Kanban or working with teams. So what do you see as the connection between those two different types of flow? Flow
Mm.
from the psychological standpoint and the flow from the team.
Yeah. So from a work perspective, to me, it's the flow of potential value through a system, right? So that we think about unobstructed movement of value through a system. And when we apply Kanban practices and Kanban ways of working, the strategy there is, hey, we want to maximize value, and Kanban's strategy for maximizing value, optimizing value, is to optimize that flow of potential value. So what I noticed about Scrum and Kanban is what I started to look into when I was thinking about how can we achieve the state of flow for groups, for teams. What are the ingredients? So you had mentioned, that chart from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi about being able to enter a state of flow when the challenge at hand matches your skill, or your challenge is just slightly more than your skill. You're able to actually tap into this state of flow. And there are a few other things that need to be in place. You need to have, it needs to be something of challenge. You need to be clear on the goals. You need to have quick feedback. Even when you're working as an individual, you need to have feedback that you're going in the right direction, and then deep focus, ability to have deep focus. So when I was looking at that, I was like, the constraints that we create in Scrum for teams are something similar.
Yeah.
Right? We have all of these like ingredients, but now it is from a team's perspective. So I started looking at that a little more deeply, but teams still don't feel that sense of flow, even when we have tried to establish some of these conditions when it comes to Scrum. And that's where that ballpoint game revealed something to me. So I used to play it in the class whenever I taught Scrum. I actually played it to debrief it in different ways. Sometimes it was to teach Scrum. Sometimes it was to teach about retrospectives. I mean, that game is so powerful. But what I noticed is that the teams were playing this game in iterations. And for people who have taken any Agile class have probably experienced this. It starts with a little bit of, like, the first round is a little bit of chaos. And the second round, people have like a little better understanding of how to play this game. And by the third round, you see something different happen. And tell me if you have experienced this as well. Like, everything goes quiet. People are so focused. They understand where to place their focus. And it is on the person who's handing the ball to them and the person that they're handing the ball to. They switch. They kind of shift into a rhythm of that group. And often it is maybe tapping into the person like who might be the slowest, as a matter of fact, because that's the kind of the constraint of the system. And so they start moving this ball from person to person in a certain rhythm. It's almost like they're doing a dance, and each individual is adjusting themselves to the person that they're getting the ball from and to the person that they're giving their ball to. There's complete trust in that. I mean, they're not worried about what anybody else is doing. They're worried about this piece of the puzzle that they are participating in. And there's a beautiful rhythm that gets established. I was like, wow, okay, that feels like flow. And here I'm teaching about, some potential value moving through the system, right?
Yeah.
And while there was this flow within the group, each individual felt like they were individually in flow. They were able to focus on their thing. It was challenging because the challenge there was they were trying to move as many balls as they could. So they had like a whip limit established that was sustainable for them. So all of this stuff happened. And as I was debriefing, I was like, okay, there was a kind of flow that was happening as the ball was moving around, where each individual was in flow, but then there was a rhythm in the collective. But there was also flow happening during the retrospective piece, when they were talking about what went well in the last round and how they could improve in the next round. And that flow was building on each other's ideas. So there was an energy there was a creativity there was high performance there, as long as they were actually now listening to each other, responding with an yes and building on each other's ideas to come up with a better way to deal with the next round. And I thought, wow, okay, I'm seeing two kinds of flow here. I started calling it asynchronous flow when they were individually moving the ball, where things had to move through a system, and synchronous flow where it was really co-creation. It was building on each other's ideas. And I thought, okay, if we think about what was happening in the team as the ball was moving around, that felt so synergistic to Kanban to me.
Mm-hmm.
And how we create the WIP limits and how we move the work through these different stages of the workflow. But what was happening in the retrospective was what we intend to happen in each of the Scrum ceremonies or each of the Scrum events, where we are co-creating something. Like in sprint planning, we are co-creating the sprint plan. And if we all show up in that way, where we are open to each other, listening, building on each other's ideas, coming up with the goal, we can really be in flow. The same thing with the retrospective, the same thing with the review. And so that's where I saw the connection between that state of consciousness and that state of being in the zone with these processes that we bring to teams, and how I thought how wonderful it would be for us to see those processes and see those events in that context and tap into this potential of high performance, high creativity, and like happiness, joy. Wow, I spoke a lot there.
No, that's beautiful. I think it's a lot of to unpack, but I can see the connection between those two types of flow. The flow from the being in the zone individually, but then it's even more, beautiful when you see a team working together synchronously, as you mentioned. Like they're synchronized now. They got to a state where they're able to trust each other, pull the work or receive the work, and there's no interruption that happens constantly. I don't know, there's a quote that I'm trying to remember, but it's like something that goes like, we design our process, and then the process help us become who we are, or something to that extent. So it's like, this process, you're putting this in context of, they're not just empty rituals that we do, they're actually helping us work in a more fulfilling way. The purpose is to get to a point where we can feel joy and fulfillment, and at the same time deliver value, right? So if we focus too much on just, we have to do all these rituals without understanding the purpose or the essence of them, then that gets lost, and people become like, they're not synchronized. They're more like, it's a bad orchestra, or everyone is like doing their own tune individually, and they're not together.
Yes, I love that bad orchestra.
Yeah, it's just noise, becomes really noise. It's not, when you hear it, when you see it or hear it, you can feel that there is, this group trusts each other. They know when to give and receive timely or gracefully, without a lot of energy spent on interruption or tension or conflict. It doesn't mean that that's not going to arise, but the way that they get to a point, like, in the game that you described, like by round 3, they're at this state where, things are just happening. They're not, and it's happening without anyone saying anything. You describe it, got quiet, things are flowing. They're in the zone, they're getting things done, and they trust each other. So as you were describing this whole idea, so I was just feeling like I'm getting goosebumps, remembering like a game that I played before with a group of leaders, where everyone basically start counting from 1 to 30 with our eyes closed, right? So you don't know when to step in and when to let someone else step in. It just kind of happened. In the beginning, obviously, everyone start to count, and then we have to start over. And then at some point, we just go from 1 to 30, and sensing that it's time to step in, and it's time to just let someone else step in. So that reminded me of this game or exercise.
Actually, I've played that game in an improv class, and initially it was like, there's no way we're going to get, I think we had to count to 27. And anytime we had spoke on top of each other, we had to start from one again. And we thought we would never get to 27. But our instructor had patience. He had a belief. And so he's like, no, we'll start again. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, we'll be here all night. But he knew that we would be able to tap into each other. And it really is the human thing at that point. It's tapping into our intuition, tapping into the other energy of the other people. So when we, again, back to like what we talked about right in the very beginning, it's about people and relationships, like how that translates to amazing work is because in that ball game, it's not so much about the balls moving. It is about how each individual adjusted to the needs of the group for the benefit of the group. And then they all enjoyed the outcome, but it was all a human shift that needed to happen.
Yeah, and it feels much more cohesive, or there is a lot of connection with the group. And I know we're trying to draw parallels between like flow at an individual level and flow at the team level. And there is a lot to be said about those two being really connected. But it seems to me like it's much harder to accomplish flow with a group, with a team, than with a person, even though it is still hard to accomplish flow at an individual level with all the context switching and distractions and everything that's going on. But it's much harder when it comes to teams. What makes it hard, as from you, what you see and notice, what makes it hard for the team to get to that state of flow?
I think the ingredients that are needed for group flow are shared. And so shared purpose, shared outcomes that everybody feels connected to. If that's not there, then it's very, very hard to establish that rhythm. And I think the way we are incentivized at our work, the way there's a value given to like expertise, there's a lot of give and take in those adjustments to achieve that collective rhythm. And if the other ingredients are not there, then it is very, very hard to get to us. So I think basically our environment in our work settings is not set up for achieving group flow in the sense. However, when those are there, interestingly, I found that flow is contagious. So you might have also experienced this, like when we go to a coffee shop, often you'll see people there who are working there, and then it's so much easier to get into that flow state in that setting because other people are in flow. So apparently there's like even this unsaid thing that's happening between human beings. People can feed off of other people's flow. So put the ingredients in place, work with other people who are in flow, and it'll naturally happen. So I think that we have opportunities, lots of opportunities to create the conditions, but it might be a little bit different than the way we have thought about work in the past.
Yeah, the ingredients are the shared purpose, having some common goal or purpose as a group can definitely help the group achieve this state of flow. And so that leads us to the other aspect of flow, which is what gets in the way. So we know what we want. We know that we need the shared purpose. We need maybe common goals. We need trust. We need leadership support. And so now what gets in the way, prevent the group from getting to that state?
Well, lack of all those things, for one, right? But one other thing that's coming to mind is that in a group, we also need somewhat equal level of skill. So it's not the same skills, but pretty equal level of competence. So having a very, very expert in something and a novice in something else, and you need both the skills to be able to get to an outcome, it's hard to achieve flow. So it's important for us to develop our craft in whatever it is that we're contributing to a group setting, to be really awesome at what we do. And the more we're able to do that and kind of meet each other at the same level of competence, that's one of the conditions that will enable flow. So in many situations, that's lacking. So people are not able to contribute fully in meaningful ways to the outcome. So that's one, distractions. So those calendars that have meetings all over the place with little gaps between, not possible to get into flow. multitasking, which is often rewarded when people do that, like, hey, be in a meeting and be doing your work at the same time and be responding to chat. Well, you're really not in flow in any of those.
Right.
So I think that those are some things that kind of impede anything that kind of impedes that your ability to focus.
I think definitely that having lack of the purpose is one that can get in the way, but also, as you mentioned, this idea of like, having the context switching. I mean, we still have this idea that a person can be working on 3 or 4 different areas at the same time, and they're all important. So when they're doing, when they're kind of like stopping and starting, that definitely gets in the way of reaching flow. And it's also not very fulfilling. At the end of the day, I've felt that on many days where at the end of the day, I feel like, okay, what did I accomplish today? There was a lot of open things, but nothing is complete, nothing is done, which is to go back to the Kanban strategy that you spoke about earlier. The idea of optimizing value as a Kanban strategy is to optimize flow, right? So if there is a lot of starts and stops, things are not moving, then nothing is going to get done at the end of the day, which means that we're not delivering any value, which means that we don't feel fulfilled at the end of a day or a week or a month. You might be familiar with the work of Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist. During the pandemic, he described this feeling that everyone was feeling as what he called languishing. So just a state of like this doesn't feel like they want to do much, or they're just in the state of blah, they're not gonna. And one of the things that he mentioned in the TED Talk was to find ways to get in a state of flow or in the zone that will help counter that sort of feeling of languishing or not feeling like you want to do much. So I think it begs the question, like, how to design that space. I know with Kanban is a strategy that provides this sort of way to reach that state of flow by controlling work in progress, by limiting distraction, unblocking things that are constantly blocked. And so it seems to me like we have all the answers of how to do this, yet we still are not able to get to the point, or at least we're not seeing a lot of teams or groups getting into that state. What do you think is happening that's preventing this from catching on and being this sort of like the way of working in organizing?
Intentionality. So I'm glad that you're doing this podcast, and I hope a lot of people listen to it, because once we become aware of some underlying, I think, opportunities for what we are doing and the way we work, people will be a little more intentional about approaching it from that context. So I think that definitely helps. But we also uncovered a whole lot of conditions that impede flow, and all those conditions still exist. And so our organizations, our leaders in our organizations, our change agents have to make some concerted effort in order to think of things in a new way. We both are also working on the Future of Work 24 hours open space conference that's coming up. And a lot of those conversations, I'm sure, will tap into this. How do we work so that we all feel fully alive? How do we work so that we feel fully alive as individuals and as in a group? And there's processes that can help us do that. And then there's some shifts that we have to make in our environments to help support that as well. And then actually, I have a new set of questions that I ask during retrospectives that is kind of tied to this. I show them that picture of the flow state and, recognizing the challenge versus your skill level. And I just ask this question: this last sprint, were you in flow, or were you bored, or were you anxious? And if you were bored, what do you need to do to get back into flow? So you probably need something a little more challenging. So take on a new challenge. And were you anxious? And if you were anxious, what do you need to do to get back into flow? So if you're anxious, that means you lack a skill. There is a gap. And so what do I need to learn in order to get back into flow? And so it gives teams a little different perspective about creating the conditions themselves that are in their control to get back into that state of of flow.
I love using that model in retrospective. I'm gonna try that. It's interesting because again, sometimes we tend to notice things and want to help or propose ideas, but at the same time, to quote again this cornerstone from coactive coaching, like people are creative, people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So you put in front of them this sort of idea that okay, where were you in the state of flow, and what would impede you, and what would you want to do differently to achieve flow? You know, a lot of time I hear to our earlier point about like meetings, a lot of people say less meetings so that I can focus. And that's happening, especially now with the pandemic and things starting to come back, having all these meetings that are constantly blocking the calendar for people who wants to focus or do some more work that will challenge them. So that's a great way to find where were we as a team in terms of flow, and how can we shift our attention to bring that flow back to the forefront.
Lots of intentionality, because collaborative sessions are needed. Some of those meetings are needed, but how do we set them up in a way that we can create pockets of time where people can individually be focused, pockets of time where we're doing that synchronous flow, where you are co-creating something with some other people, but there's a lot of again, stuff that needs to happen to make those feel like we are in flow. I don't know, we probably won't go into that today, but there's that whole the environment for co-creation and getting into that kind of flow state, the yes and the improv, being an improv artist with your team, and that gets you into flow as well, a different kind.
Yeah, I love that word intentionality, or in being intentional or intention, because a lot of time the focus is just getting things done, which is, again, that's still every team, every organization, they want to deliver value. They want to put something out there sooner, but at the same time, it's almost like there's what we want, and what we're doing is not supporting what we want.
Yes.
So that there is a mixed ideas around, okay, here's what we want, but we're going to do things that are not going to get us where we want, what we want. So intention is definitely something to highlight. What's the intention? Where are we focusing our attention, and how do we shift the attention so that we can create more impact or deliver sooner?
And what's wonderful about flow, and you know this, is that our performance, our efficiency goes up many-fold when we are able to tap into the state. I mean, you can get talking about twice the work in half the time. It's not the process. It's this that actually allows us to get a lot more done when we are able to intentionally tap into the state individually and as a group.
This is something that has been on my mind, the flow for years. And when I find that my day is getting, at the end of the day, if I have this feeling of, okay, I didn't really feel like I've accomplished or delivered, and then I check in on how was I in terms of flow, how much focus or intention did I have on this sort of work, and get in the zone. And if the day is just kind of flying and I'm like reacting to a lot of what's happening, I find that that's why I don't feel that sort of fulfillment or in flow at the end of the day.
Yes.
What's your experience? How do you find flow, and how do you know when you're in flow and when you're not?
Well, again, like you, I think there are good days and not so good days, depending on what's happening in my environment. But in my attempt to try to get to flow, I actually apply a lot of Scrum and Kanban practices. So I have a Trello board that I maintain in terms of the things that I would like to accomplish. And there are different levels of distance from when it's going to get done. So I have like this quarter, this month, this day. So every week, I kind of use a few elements of the Scrum framework. So on a Sunday, I sit down and look at what's coming up in the upcoming week. What's the most important thing that I'd like to get done? Break it up into smaller, more granular pieces. Then every day, I just create a checklist, because the feedback from a checking off an item on the checklist is hugely motivating for me.
Yeah.
So the day's plan and kind of working through that. And for the most part, if there isn't something that I have to react to, and I'm able to kind of go down this list of what I wanted to get done, it feels wonderful, and I'm able to do that. But then there are times that the world, life happens when you're busy making plans, and that kind of stuff happens. In which case, hey, that day I might not be in flow. But more recently, I have been doing a lot more collaborative work, pairing with others. And what has been amazing is being able to get into that state with another person. And I wasn't able to do that for a long time. And I think now the right match of person, and again, all of those ingredients of having something meaningful that we're working towards, a shared purpose, the level of skill being matched, and a time box where we have to get this done. I tell you what a wonderful and how joyful it is to get into a state of flow with another person. And so I've been enjoying that more recently as well.
I sense a blog post coming on the ingredients of flow, so I'm gonna look out for it.
Okay.
Well,
all right.
I'm just because I guess we've talked about some of the ingredients already, and it's a lot to cover. I could probably talk about this all day and continue to just explore and unpack this concept of flow. But I know we're coming to the end here. What are some of the things that you want to leave us with or point us to before we wrap up?
I think just from my study of this topic, I think it's such an intriguing, amazing human condition that we all have access to. And yeah, I have a couple blog posts on flow, but I'm going to do one on the ingredients of flow. Experiment with it. Tap into it. It's amazing. And tap into it for yourself and tap into it with your teams and see what becomes possible. So that's one. And I think the other thing is about what we talked about just a little while ago is about intentionality. I think we really need to pause and take a look at what we're doing and what are we putting in our own way of being able to do amazing things, getting to better outcomes, and ensuring that it also is taking care of our well-being. I think this individual flow state is taking care of our well-being as well, right? It's like getting us into that, making us feel alive, establishing a sustainable pace that we all need. So intentionality is the second thing that I'd say, and play with flow.
I love that, play with flow. And so where do people go to find about your blogs or work?
I am quite active on LinkedIn. I really enjoy that medium of exchange. And so you'll probably feel free to connect with me there. I am also on Twitter, but not as much as I am on LinkedIn. And you can go to my website. It's ppl-coach.com and see the stuff that I do there. I do a lot of product leadership work. And so I offer some public classes in that vein. And like you, also a pro Kanban trainer. So, there's a class coming up on that as well in May.
Yeah, I recommend everyone to check out the prokanban.org website. They're doing really phenomenal work. And I know you're doing some work with April Jefferson. You have a podcast together that you started and have been trying to put things out there. So hopefully people can go and listen to that as well. But I really appreciate your time, Anjali. It's been a pleasure. It's always good to talk to you.
Same here, Salah. I know we can talk forever. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your show. And I hope to see you soon at maybe Agile 2022.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope we get to see each other in person again at some point. But thank you. And we'll talk again soon.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity. Then repeat.